Hi guys and gals and kittens, and welcome to the I Need a Magic show. So in this video I'm going to be talking about HTTP endpoints and how they work when you want to create API HTTP endpoints that you can invoke from a client or something like that. So here I have my test cloudlet. I'm going to go into Hyper ID, and then I'm going to expand modules, and then I'm going to create a new folder, call it YouTube. Now, a folder inside of the modules folder, I typically refer to that folder as a module. And the reasons for that is because everything is opinionated in Magic. For instance, if I now create a new file inside of this folder and I call it foo.get.hl, and then I provide then I just do something such as return result success. What I've done now is that I've created an HTTP get endpoint. See, its name is .get.hl. HL meaning Hyperlambda, get meaning the HTTP verb I can use to access this guy. And actually, if I now open up manage on endpoints in a different browser window and I search for foo here now, and I copy its URL and I open it up in a different browser window, you will see that the URL resolves to my cloudlet /magic/modules/YouTube/foo. And when I'm invoking it, I'm getting JSON back automatically. So first of all, the Hyperlambda endpoint resolver will automatically transpile from Hyperlambda to JSON by default, unless I explicitly override it by setting the HTTP response header. Something I can do by doing something like this, response dot, and then I can headers set, content type, application / Hyperlambda. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to work, but okay, so now it got a guru meditation message because it didn't want to return Hyperlambda. However, the point being, maybe if I change it to x dot, I'm not entirely sure. And now it actually downloads the file as Hyperlambda because my browser doesn't have a MIME type, allowing it to actually, consume Hyperlambda or show Hyperlambda. So the file name changes the verb that is being used to access the resource. And we have get, we have delete, we have post, and we have put, and we have patch. Those are the available HTTP verbs you can associate with an endpoint. And if you remember carefully here, now you see the URL becomes /magic/ is an opinionated URL. Everything is by convention in Magic, and this /magic/parts actually ensures that it becomes the API endpoint resolver that actually handles the request. The API endpoint resolver by default returns everything as JSON and respects the verb name as part of the file name, etc., etc. Just for fun, let's rename this guy to post, foo.post.hl, and then if we refresh here now and I filter for foo, you will see now that it's changed to a post verb for this particular endpoint. So this allows me to create one file for every single verb with the same name and the same URL. So I can have the same file name, foo.post.hl, as I'm using for my foo.get.hl and HTTP endpoint. So now, let's reset this guy back to foo.get.hl. Already at this point, from within Hyper ID itself, you can click function F5, which will actually invoke the Hyperlambda file and return whatever the Hyperlambda file returns. So now comes the question, okay, how do we provide arguments to our endpoint? Well, that is very easy. You declare a node whose name is dot arguments, at which point you can provide any arguments you want. Let's say we want to have a query as a string. Okay, the name of the argument becomes query, its type becomes string. When we come into this code inside of our Hyperlambda file, the HTTP endpoint resolver in Hyperlambda will automatically have converted any HTTP get query parameters into a string. So now if we do, for instance, strings.concat, hello there, get value, and let's change it to name, and then let's do a yield here instead, result. Hopefully this is going to work. Now when I execute the file from directly within HyperID, it asks me for my name, Thomas Hansen, at which point it's going to concatenate it with a greeting, return that greeting back to the client. So now what you see here, what we're doing is that basically we have a dot arguments collection, lambda object, so to speak, at the top of the file. This declares the arguments the endpoint can legally handle. And interestingly now, if I find foo again here now, and I copy this URL and I open it up and I provide a name equal Thomas, then it's going to happily accept that argument, that query parameter. But if I now provide ampersand and age equals 47, boom. Why does this happen now? Well, because the endpoint doesn't allow for any other arguments than the name argument, period. All arguments are by default optional in an Hyperlambda HTTP endpoint, but no arguments not explicitly declared in the arguments collection can legally be supplied to the endpoint. So now if you see, if you look at the error message in your log here now, it says, I don't know how to handle the age query parameter. If we now add age here and pass it in as an integer, and then execute it, then you will see all of a sudden the age argument is happily accepted by the Hyperlambda endpoint resolver. So this is the general method that you would use to create an HTTP endpoint. And please realize that there's absolutely no difference between a function, a file, an HTTP endpoint, except it can be resolved using the Hyperlambda endpoint resolver or any other Hyperlambda snippet. So I can create another file now inside of here now, howdy.hl, which is not an HTTP endpoint because it doesn't end with .get or .patch or .post. But now I can, if I want to, I can copy this URL. Then I can do execute file. Then I can pass in age, int 147, name John Doe. Then I can do return or return notes. Save it and execute this guy. At which point all of a sudden you see my original Hyperlambda was successfully executed and it returned the concatenation of my arguments plus its greeting. So there's no difference between a file and a function or a lambda object or a string for that matter, assuming the string is actually legal Hyperlambda, etc., etc. So everything can be used as a function, and this is actually what the framework itself takes advantage of when it is executing these Hyperlambda files dynamically. So that was a short video showing you the basics of how to create an HTTP endpoint. When you have a module such as this, you can actually download the entirety of the module like this. And you can also automatically wire it up to become like a plugin of your choosing, such that it's easily installable on other cloudlets, allowing you to rapidly move it from one cloudlet to another cloudlet, etc. But that will be the subject of a later video. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.